Hi, I'm Michelle Bowles, and welcome to this presentation on the Cliff Notes to Connection and the Cliff Notes about conflict. So, I wanted to talk to you about this very important message, and I'm so glad that you decided to join me. And this may be information that is really critical to your life and your ability to enjoy your life. And it might be important to someone you know. So please feel free to share this. This is my gift to anyone who is interested in learning how to manage conflict better in their life. So let's get started. If you would please do me the favor of putting away your other devices, anything that would be a distraction. Find a quiet place, and I know that can be challenging, but find a quiet place where you can really just listen to this message. I'm going to keep it short and sweet, and I hope that is helpful to you, because if we can learn how to deal with conflict better on this planet, we have a fighting chance for creating the world that we want. So let's start by creating the relationship that you want. So the first thing I want to say is that projections block us from connection and create conflict. So what is a projection? Well, a projection is a story that our mind makes up based on information that it has. And sometimes it has a lot of information, and sometimes all it needs is one or two tiny pieces of information, and it will fill in the rest with what it's experienced previously in our life. So projections are made from the past experiences. I'm going to give you an example. So I know it might be hard to see because the camera's up close, but I'm going to raise my hand. And when I raise my hand, that's a piece of information. And just take a moment to let your mind fill in the blanks. It's going to fill in an idea around what my motivation is for raising my hand. So what most people begin with is they say, well, you want attention, or you have a question. And that's because so many of us grew up in the school system, and this is the context our mind uses to understand my motivations for raising my hand. Now, what if I was standing on the street of New York? Then your brain would say, oh, that context tells me she's trying to hail a cab or get a ride. What if you grew up in Nazi Germany and this meant that I was a Nazi? What if you grew up and somebody raised their hand like this to hit you? Now, your body is going to tell you, it's going to make up the projection that I mean to hurt you, or that I'm an evil person, or that I'm a soldier, or something that fills in the blanks based on that history, that experience in your past. Is there anything innately dangerous about raising my hand? No, of course not. But our brain will fill in the gaps based on our history. So if you have a history of something connected to something your partner does, and your brain fills in a story around their intention and what it means, then you are going to get scared and you're going to start to react in some way to try to protect yourself from whatever it is that you're afraid of. And when you do that, your partner is likely to also start their own projections around what that means, the behavior you're doing, where you're trying to protect yourself. But they're going to look at that behavior, which is probably not innately dangerous to them, but they're going to fill in their own gaps, and they are going to start their own projections. So now we're each projecting onto one another. And what happens then is neither one of us feels seen accurately. And it only takes a slight misperception to start this cycle of projections, of negative projections. And when that happens, we start to defend ourselves, we start to make it worse, and the conflict escalates. Projections block the connection. And projections are made of our past. They're built from our past. So when we have a conflict, we think that we're dealing with a pretty factual situation, but underneath the facts is a lot of energy. So if you think about like an iceberg, right? And we only see the tip of the iceberg. And so the tip of the iceberg is what we can see, and it's the facts of the situation. But below the iceberg is the projection, is the fear of whatever story we're telling ourselves, the story that we're telling ourselves. And when we tell ourselves that story, the negative belief that we have about ourselves, which creates the pain or the hurt. So underneath an iceberg is the projection. And when we only try to resolve the facts of the situation and we leave the rest of that there, it's still there and it's going to show up in another area with a different set of facts. So when we have a conflict, we want to think about, well, how much energy is around this particular conflict for me? So if my husband doesn't clean up the kitchen, for me, that's like a 2, maybe a 1, maybe it doesn't even register. It doesn't hit my buttons. So it doesn't have much energy for me. But for other people, when their partner doesn't clean up the kitchen, that becomes a 7 or an 8. And it's because of the story their brain is making up around what that fact means. So it's important to understand how much energy is in the facts or the conflict of this situation, and understanding that the more energy there is, probably the more information there is below the tip of the iceberg. So the number one challenge, the number one problem that couples have when it comes to managing conflict is they try to solve the problem by dealing with the facts. But they don't understand what's below the tip of the iceberg. So when we go to solve a problem, it's a lot like a Rubik's Cube. If you remember the Rubik's Cube, I never learned how to actually solve the Rubik's Cube, but you can hack it. You can hack the Rubik's Cube and you can move it around, and in like 5 minutes, you can make all the sides the same color. But whenever I went to solve the Rubik's Cube, I was just trying to get it one side all one color. Maybe I could get 2 sides, but that was all the further I could get. And that's like conflict for a couple. When you try to solve a problem, you only see the facts from your perspective, and you only resolve the problem from your perspective. But while you're trying to solve your side of the equation, you're jacking up the other sides of the Rubik's Cube. And the Rubik's Cube, the whole Rubik's Cube, is your relationship. So we want to get to harmony. We want to create a situation where both people can break down the projections and understand what their real fears and hurts are about. And then when we do that, we have a better chance of resolving the issue. But most couples just try to solve the problem, and they just see the facts, and they don't take the time to go beneath the iceberg. What's beneath the tip of the iceberg? Well, our fears. And our fears become stories. The story might be, you don't appreciate me, you don't care, you don't get me, you're a liar, you're violent, you're not safe, you're a cheat, you're dishonest, you're something bad. And the story may be true, but oftentimes it has more energy around it, because if some of that was true, then you would just leave. Like if they were truly an evil person, you would just leave. But they're not evil. It's conflated with these projections. So underneath the tip of the iceberg is your fear, and then your fear stories. And some of them might be true and some of them might not be true. And to break this down, it's important for you to figure out which is true and which is not true. And then when you tell yourself that story, I'm not appreciated, my partner can't be trusted, these type of stories, again, which may be true, but when you tell yourself those stories, what hurts is a negative belief about yourself. So if you're like that, then I'm not lovable, I made a poor choice, I'm stupid, I don't deserve love. Somehow I connect this bad thing about you to my own worthiness. And that hurts, that causes pain. And that is all connected to our history. The story that gets filled in is filled in from our past. It might be a past with a parent, but it could equally be a past with a sibling, best friend, group of friends, classmates, teammates, teachers, coaches, any person in your life who hurt you. So any experience you have where someone was bad and they treated you badly and you felt pain and took that personally and made it about your worth, the more experiences you have like that, the more it's going to fuel your conflicts. And the facts will change. They'll change over the years, but the energy will not. And the more you believe the projection, the stronger they get, and the more they activate your partner's projections. So if you don't get below the tip of the iceberg and talk about what you're scared of, what the fear story is, own how you react poorly to protect yourself, look at the negative belief about yourself when you tell yourself this story, and then connect those negative beliefs to the bad people, the bad, painful experiences from your past. Then we begin to break apart the iceberg and we create deep empathy for our partner, but only if we go both ways, only if we try to solve the Rubik's Cube from both perspectives. And we take the time and the space to really hear about sort of the irrational, non-factual, but emotional parts of the facts. And when we can do that, and we can just make space for those irrational emotions and the energy of them, because they're real and they're powerful feelings, then we can develop deep empathy for one another. And there are problems that are just unsolvable, but they're only unsolvable because of the current state of affairs. If we can stretch for our partner out of deep empathy, they might shift and change. Some of the issues that we deal with are solvable, and we resolve them and we move on. But the longer you stay with somebody, the more likely you're going to find two conflicts, two projections that hook into each other and link together. And then we both have so much energy for this particular conflict that it's hard to slow down and go beneath the tip of the iceberg. We just end up arguing the facts. We build really strong cases. We memorize our lines and they're almost the same every time. And we try to convince our partner of the validity of our perspective. And we end up just arguing about reality. And we do this so often that it eventually becomes Groundhog's Day, just over and over and over. And so if that's how you're managing conflict, then you really need to get some communication skills so that you can go beneath the tip of the iceberg. When we can take time to understand what's beneath the tip of our iceberg, which a lot of times is unconscious, and the time to understand what's beneath the tip of the iceberg for our partner, now we can really have a different experience around the issues and the supposed facts of the case. But of course, that's not what we do all the time. I get hooked into my partner's behavior, my stories, and then I want to, build the case, judge him, condemn him, throw him in jail. But, he's also my beloved. And I want to understand what is happening between us. And when we can come together as a team, we can move out of that conflict cycle faster, easier, and really learn about each other to become even better partners for each other. A lot of couples manage conflict in this way, where fights escalate. Some couples, though, are very skilled at ignoring the conflict, just ignoring it and making do with whatever the situation is. And that works for a long time, but a lot of times after the distractions of life end, the kids leave home, work changes, someone retires, just something changes, it becomes a lot more important, because underneath the tip of the iceberg is not just projections, but it's a way to understand ourselves more deeply and to understand our experience more deeply and our partner more deeply. So there's a lot of room to find intimacy and growth and connection beneath the tip of the iceberg. So if we ignore conflict, a lot of times we end up with a relationship that feels flat. The spark is gone, it feels dead, we feel dead, and we think it might be the relationship's problem. And so then we get to either we wander and there's some kind of betrayal, or we just decide, we're at a crossroads and we need to decide what we're going to do now. So managing conflict through the facts and problem solving or ignoring conflict both have pretty poor outcomes. It's just a matter of which one you're going to do if you don't learn to go beneath the tip of the iceberg. So I really hope that you take what I'm telling you today and you think about how you want to handle conflict in your relationship and what skills you might need in order to be able to do that better. How many hours have you spent on your favorite hobby? Think about all the books you've read, or the classes you've taken, or however you have learned and developed that skill. Think about all the hours you spent practicing to be proficient, if not an expert in that area. Well, relationships are the most important thing for you to focus on, because if you don't have a satisfying relationship, it is going to drain so much of your energy away that you will not have as much energy to devote towards the things that you're passionate about in this world. So it's really critical. It's a foundation for your entire life, is to have a relationship that's satisfying. Now, you don't need a relationship to have a satisfying life, but if you have one, it needs to be satisfying. So it's the most important thing that you can do is to spend some time and devote some energy to understanding how to have a satisfying relationship. Understanding conflict is a critical component because it's the number one issue for most couples, is how they manage conflict. However, even if you handle conflict really well, the daily interactions will create the relationship satisfaction. So we need to have really satisfying daily interactions as well as manage conflict well.